Genesis chapter 7. The flood begins. The ark was finished. For years, Noah had followed every instruction God had given him, board by board, room by room, level by level. What had once been nothing more than a command from God now stood before the world as an enormous vessel towering over the land. But the time for building had come to an end. The time for entering had arrived. God spoke once again to Noah. Enter the ark. Noah was not going alone. His wife would enter with him, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, 8 people in all, 8 lives chosen to carry humanity through the coming judgment. But there was more. Animals began to arrive. Creatures of every kind came according to God's command, the great and the small, the powerful and the gentle, birds of the air, animals of the field, creatures that crawled upon the ground. Pairs entered the ark, male and female, preserving the life that would one day fill the earth again. Among the animals considered suitable for sacrifice and worship, additional pairs were brought aboard. Noah gathered food. The animals found their places. The family entered. Everything was ready. Then came a moment unlike any other in history. God himself closed the door. Outside the ark, life continued. For a brief time, the world appeared unchanged. The same fields stretched toward the horizon. The same homes stood beneath the open sky. People continued their daily routines, unaware that the warning they had ignored was about to become reality. Then, the rain began. Perhaps it started with only a few drops. A strange sound against the earth. Then more and more. The clouds opened. Rain poured from the heavens. At the same time, waters burst forth from beneath the earth. What had been dry land began to disappear beneath a rising flood. Streams became rivers. Rivers overflowed their banks. Valleys filled. The waters rose higher and higher. The people who had mocked Noah's obedience now faced the reality of God's warning. But the door was closed. Inside the ark, Noah and his family were surrounded by darkness and uncertainty. Outside, the world they had known was disappearing. The rain continued, not for a day, not for a week. For 40 days and 40 nights, the storm poured upon the earth. The waters covered the land. Eventually, even the highest places disappeared beneath the flood. Mountains that had stood for generations vanished beneath the rising waters. Every living creature outside the ark was swept away. The judgment was complete. The world that had been filled with violence, corruption, and rebellion was silent. But inside the ark, life remained. Imagine what those days must have been like. The sound of rain striking the roof, the movement of the enormous vessel as it rose above the waters, the cries of animals, the constant work of caring for them, the uncertainty of not knowing when the storm would end. Noah had trusted God enough to build the ark. Now he had to trust him enough to remain inside it. There was nowhere else to go, no land in sight, no familiar landmarks, no path leading home, only water, only the ark, and only the promise of God. The floodwaters continued to rise until the ark floated above a world completely transformed. The old civilization was gone. The cities, the fields, the homes, the monuments to human pride, all disappeared beneath the water. Everything humanity had built apart from God had proven temporary, but the ark remained. Not because Noah was stronger than anyone else, not because the vessel itself possessed some magical power. It remained because God had provided a way of salvation. The same God who had announced judgment had also made a path for mercy. For Noah and his family, the ark was more than a ship. It was their refuge, a place of safety surrounded by destruction. And as the waters carried them through the storm, they were holding on to something greater than the wood beneath their feet. They were holding on to the faithfulness of God. For 150 days, the waters continued to prevail over the earth. The ark drifted across the vast expanse. Noah could not control its direction. He could not command the wind. He could not lower the waters. All he could do was trust. And sometimes that is where faith is tested most deeply. Not when God gives the instructions, not when the work first begins, but in the waiting, when the storm has already come, when the familiar world has disappeared, when there is nothing left to do but remain faithful and believe that God has not forgotten. And then, Genesis gives us a simple statement filled with extraordinary hope. God remembered Noah. This did not mean that God had forgotten him and suddenly recalled his existence. It meant that God turned his attention toward fulfilling the promise he had made. The Creator had not abandoned the ark to the endless waters. The storm had served its purpose. Judgment had come. But judgment would not last forever. A new beginning was coming. God caused a wind to pass over the earth. The waters began to recede. The fountains of the deep were restrained. The rain began to stop. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the floodwaters began to fall. Then one day, the ark came to rest. After months of drifting across a world covered in water, the great vessel settled upon the mountains of Ararat. For the first time in what must have felt like an eternity, Noah and his family were no longer moving. But they were not yet free. The waters still covered much of the earth. They would have to wait. Again. And so Noah waited for the moment when the door would finally open, when the land would be restored, when his family would step into a world completely changed. The flood had washed away the old, but God was preparing something new. A new beginning for humanity, a new opportunity, a new chapter in the story of God's relationship with the world. Soon Noah would send out a bird. Soon dry land would begin to appear. Soon the survivors of the flood would walk beneath an open sky once again. But for now, the ark rested, the waters slowly withdrew. And somewhere beyond the walls of that great vessel, a new world was waiting, to be continued in Genesis chapter 8.